Friends. Good afternoon. Good afternoon to the 16th afternoon program of our 21-day program. I said in the morning, and I will remind us ourselves, we are in the third week. We are completing the second module today, moving on to our third module tomorrow. But before we finish our second module, we have a very special session today on the best practices of national human rights institutions in our region. We have therefore invited two very honorable commissioners of two very respectable commissions in our region who are going to be there, together with a civil society representative. And I might say a few words in between on some civil society institutions that we created, which was referred to this morning. I therefore have the pleasure, friends, to warmly welcome into our midst Commissioner Karen Gomez-Dumpit from the Philippines Commission on Human Rights. A warm welcome, Karen. Karen is a good old friend. You must be thinking, how many friends do you have all around the world? Very few, but these are the precious few. I have the pleasure of introducing her with a slide so that I don't miss too much of the information that needs to be said about a commissioner. Karen has served the Philippines government since 1990. For the past 30 years. Nobody will believe that you have done that, Karen. They're seeing you. Of which 27 years has been in the commission. A very long period in the commission. I'm sure we have Mr. Parashar here, who has served in the Indian Commission for almost 23 years, if I don't make a mistake. If I make a mistake, pardon me. But you have done 27 years. You've beaten everybody. 25 years of which has been devoted to human rights advocacy, including 9 years as the first director of the Commission on Human Rights Child Rights Center. She's a career executive service officer since 1998. Her last post before her appointment as a commissioner was the director of Government Linkages Office, which is now renamed Policy Advisory Office. Friends, for 13 years she implemented programs that carry out the constitutional mandate to monitor government compliance with human rights treaty obligations. Harmonizing domestic laws in accordance with standards and principles set by core international human rights instruments. Monitoring of Philippine jurisprudence that affirm human rights treaties, and advising the executive and other relevant state agencies on its implementation of the obligation to respect, protect, and fulfill human rights. The programmatic innovations in human rights advocacy include the human rights-based approach to legislation and groundbreaking engagements of the Commission on Human Rights in the human rights promotion and protection mechanisms of the United Nations, which we heard very eloquently this morning from Madam Rosalind Noonan, like the Universal Periodic Review, the Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, the Convention on the Rights of All Migrant Workers and Their Families, the Convention Against Torture, Cruel, and Other Inhuman, Degrading Treatment or Punishment, the Convention on the Rights of the Child, and the Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, all of which will be introduced to you tomorrow. Karen is the focal commissioner of the Commission on Human Rights in the Philippines, who attends to the following advocacies: on right to life, anti-death penalty, gender equality, anti-discrimination, human rights of women, LGBTI, older persons. Co-focal concerns include migrant workers, persons with disabilities, human rights defenders. The Commission's operation in our current portfolios include administration as a focal commissioner, human rights policy as a co-focal commissioner, and human rights promotion as co-focal commissioner. We are very, very happy we have you with us. Karen was finished her communications arts in De La Salle University in 1989. In 1994, she earned her postgraduate degree in Masters in Public Management with honors at the Development Academy of the Philippines and obtained a Master of Science in Human Rights with honors as a British Semling Scholar at the London School of Economics and Political Science in 2004. Karen, with her other members of the 5th Commission, 2015 to 2022, serves a 7-year term which ends on 5th May 2022. The Indian Commission had only 5-year term, which has now been reduced to 3 years. Here is a commissioner with us who is serving a 7-year term, which ends in 2022. Thank you very much, Karen, for having accepted to be with us. We are delighted to welcome you. I have walked into that commission several times, and every time I get back, I learn something new. And the last I learned in their commission was their Freedom Park. Friends, storytelling is important. And I asked them, what is this Freedom Park? And the commission's chairperson very eloquently explained to us that that was a park where people could come and protest. And they could also protest against the Commission on Human Rights of the Philippines if they wanted. But there was a big place in front of the commission, very well developed park where people could come and protest. It was a protest area developed by the commission for respecting the freedom of association and assembly. More, I will leave her. It's a very, very warm place. I've enjoyed some afternoon meals sometimes when I've gone there with all of them sitting together. Lovely people, warm people, but very, very firm on their professional protection of human rights of their own people. Over to you, Karen.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
We can.
Okay. Thank you and good evening from the Philippines. Henry, thank you for your invitation. It's an honor to be with you tonight. I understand it's the afternoon there in India. I was invited to speak about some good practices, not best practice, good practices of the Commission on Human Rights of the Philippines and domestic protection of human rights. So I'd like to, of course, request you to share the screen. Is that possible for my presentation so that I can, I don't see the screen sharing just yet.
Rajavel?
Yeah,
is it
just
possible
1 minute.
to do that? All right. So, well, and of course, with an outline that we have. So next slide, please. Okay. Next slide. And the outline is the next slide. Yep. There's a bit of a lag, I think.
Next slide.
Okay. So let me just give you an outline of what I'm going to talk about. Just let me know if I'm not loud enough. I'm sitting quite a distance away from my screen. What I'd like to give you is, of course, just some basics. It's a review of what national human rights institutions are and why are they important for domestic human rights protection and how they can become real. And then, of course, what are some good practices and methods of functioning in the Commission on Human Rights? I'd like to share with you our experience, not just the current Commission's experience. I've been with the Commission, as Henry said, for a number of years. I moved to the commission. It was just my second job. So I'm not that young, but I'm still young, I think. I'm the youngest commissioner in this batch. And then, of course, why have we sustained the interest to work towards making human rights protection real through our work as a national human rights institution? Okay, next slide, please. So why are national human rights institutions important for domestic human rights protection becoming real? So this is one of the things that we want to convey. And even if national human rights institutions have been there for quite some time, maybe 50 years, it's still a relatively new kind of institution. And in some countries, they are unheard of. In the Philippines, well, in Southeast Asia, we can fairly say that we're the oldest national human rights institution, and we have been in operation for about 33 years. And we belong to a group called the National Human Rights Institution. And what are they? They're an independent body set up by a state through a constitutional or a legislative mandate to protect and promote human rights. And our general role is really to address discrimination in all forms, as well as to promote the protection of civil, political, economic, social, and cultural rights. We serve as a link between government and civil society insofar as we help bridge the protection gap between the rights of individuals and the responsibilities of the state. So if there's a metaphor that best describes us, maybe it will be a bridge. We bridge civil society to government and vice versa. Next slide, please. Okay. So if we take a look at the Commission on Human Rights, you can just click twice, I think that would be good for the visuals. We are entrenched in the Philippine Constitution, in the 1987 Constitution through Article 2, Section 11 of the 1987 Constitution, where, of course, we say this is the state policy on human rights. The state values the dignity of every human person and guarantees full respect for human rights. And Article 13 created us in the same Constitution under Section 17, whereby we have been created as a constitutional body, independent of the executive, legislative, and the judiciary. So can we have the next slide, please? So just to say that CHR is currently, we have been reaccredited, I think, about, if I'm not mistaken, we've been reaccredited thrice, and we have always been accorded an A-level status, which is the gold standard in any NHRI accreditation. And this comes from what we call the Paris Principles. And the United Nations Paris Principles talks about the standards within which a national human rights institution must operate. And it says that we have to have a broadband. We independently have autonomy from government because we're the monitors and we have to be independent of government. And the independence should be guaranteed, well, by the Constitution in our case, but in other NHRIs, it's by law. Normally, this is an important aspect of the establishment of a national human rights institution because constitutions hardly ever change. Our constitution has not been touched since 1987, so it will be more difficult to amend any law that would affect the mandate of the, well, at least for our case in the commission, because it's constitutionally entrenched. Unlike if it's created by law, then normally Congress or Parliament would be able to change that law with ease or easier than if it were entrenched in a constitution. Of course, it speaks of pluralism, meaning that representation of the commission should be should have a pluralist representation. As you can see, when I was introduced, I was focal commissioner and co-focal commissioner for thematic areas, for issues such as the death penalty or right to life, gender equality, etc. So that's what pluralism means. It's not only the membership of the commission saying that I am from, of course, the women's sector, and there will be some from civil society, etc. But it also talks of themes and issues and concerns. Of course, an NHRI has to have adequate resources. Maybe later on we can have a conversation about how we operate independently through financial resources. But we are funded by the state, and our funds are guaranteed. In the Constitution, it says that our general appropriations must be released automatically and regularly. And by practice, our budget, although it's always been not enough, has not been, in practice, will not be reduced. So if we have a certain level of budget for the previous year, that cannot be reduced in terms of maintenance and other operating expenses as well as personnel services. But our capital outlay resources have been what we call this, not really increasing because it depends on the needs of the commission at that particular time. Resources also means human resources. It's not only financial resources as well. We are present in all regional agrupations in the Philippines. So we have about 16 administrative regions, and we have offices in all of those areas. We have adequate powers of investigation as well. So next slide, please. So this is just an infographic of how the Commission on Human Rights is placed in a map in the government of the Philippines. So if you find, if you take a look at it, of course, the traditional democratic institutions that we have, of course, the separation of powers. We have the executive, the legislative, and the judiciary. But of course, we have constitutional commissions, and let me just name that to you. Commission, of course, is in charge of it's the human resource of government, but it's an independent body as well. They are a constitutional commission, as well as the Commission on Elections is an independent constitutional commission. The Commission on Audit, the monies that are being audited in government, of course, has to have an independent body, and it's a constitutional commission as well. We have two other constitutional bodies, and if ever we share a particular maybe relationship, a closer relationship, it would be the Office of the Ombudsman, which is really in charge of corruption cases, malfeasance, misfeasance. So some of our investigative reporting and recommendations really go through the Office of the Ombudsman, because they're the ones who are taking care of. And the Commission on Human Rights, we are what we call a sui generis, a class of our own, because we don't really have an identical or a close relative in the government. If ever we had a first cousin, it would be the Ombudsman. In other jurisdictions, you find NHRIs that have the mandate to also investigate corruption cases. In our case, we could, if it affects human rights, if it impacts fund, that's have powers, and we refer cases to them, as well as in the executive through the Department of Justice, which is where our prosecutorial arm is. So next slide, please. So we have our constitutional mandates. Let me just name them to you. Of course, our first mandate is to investigate on our own or on complaint by any party, any human rights violations involving civil and political rights. And this actually has caused some problems in the past because they said only civil and political rights. Why can't we investigate economic, social, and cultural rights? We found a way around that because if you will check later on, and of course in practice, you know, human rights are indivisible. So we might find roots of violations of civil and political rights in economic, social, and cultural rights. I often say this, a very simplistic answer or example would be, how will government know that people are hungry, which is economic, social, and cultural rights, found in that particular category, which is right to food, for instance, if they won't be allowed to express their opinions, to express their feelings, to say that they are hungry, which is civil and political rights. Our second mandate, of course, is to exercise visitorial powers over jails, prisons, and detention facilities. All, if not most, of NHRIs have this mandate that we do exercise visitorial powers over any kind of detention facility. Next slide, please. We provide, of course, appropriate legal measures for the protection of human rights of all persons within the Philippines. But this is quite unique as well because we have a mandate to provide appropriate legal measures for Filipinos abroad. So this is our migrant, what we call overseas Filipino workers. We have a mandate to ensure that our overseas Filipino migrant workers get legal measures as well. And then, of course, provide preventive measures and legal aid services to the underprivileged whose human rights have been violated or need protection. We do have legal services for that. Next slide, please. Of course, establish a continuing program of research, education, and information to enhance respect for the primacy of human rights. That's why I'm here right now, dispensing my duties and obligations to establish a continuing program of education and information. This one is something that I have taken care of in my past roles as a director of the Government Linkages Office. This is to recommend to Congress effective measures to promote human rights and to provide for compensation to victims of human rights violations or their families. We've been able to come up with a compensation law for the human rights violations committed during the martial law period or during the period of when former President Marcos, the dictator, imposed martial law in the Philippines in the 70s, well into the early 80s. And of course, this one is also part of my role when I was director, monitor Philippine government's compliance with international treaty obligations on human rights. And this is where we found our direct mandate to be able to investigate, inquire on economic, social, and cultural rights issues. Next slide, please. And now I'm going to the second part, which is what are some of the good practices and methods of functioning of the Commission on Human Rights of the Philippines. And I will share with you 4 aspects. Next slide, please. First is, of course, to include looking into long-term to change hearts and minds of people. And this is really all about popularization of human rights. And the best example I can give right now is maximizing social media. And the context of this, of course, is that in a political climate where human rights is dichotomized or even weaponized, even as we speak here in the Philippines, it's important to make the public more aware of what human rights are and make them more relatable to those who do not work in the field of human rights. What do we mean by this? Maybe part of why we have what we call a human rights crisis is because maybe we were too, I don't know the proper word for it, but maybe human rights advocates get too crafty and get too technical about words and terms that we miss the mark in terms of making sure that people take to heart that they have human rights, that it's part of everyday life, that it's not about saying that human rights are only for criminals, etc. And uh, they have to and they have to be able to participate, appreciate the fact that if they don't, let's say, if they don't try to uphold the rights of the accused because they think that this person is so gruesome and committed a lot of heinous crimes that he does not deserve to live, etc. What we normally say to them is that sooner, probably, hopefully not, but when it's your turn to be accused, don't you think that you're going to hang on to each and every right that you have? So you have to guarantee that to the other person so that when your turn comes, then you know that the system is in place that will respect you. I've said this, the second part, of course, on good practices is serving like a bridge. And in this case, we do continue monitoring of human rights and engagement with civil society, with government and other human rights mechanisms. We are a bridge, but what we can say is that the bridge is founded on and always is underpinned by human rights standards, human rights norms, and it does not waver on that. So even if we don't agree with civil society, we say it. We don't agree with government, we say it as well. And what we do is we ensure that all our issuances will always stand for the principle and the standards that are entrenched in the UN treaty mechanisms. Next slide, please. So the third is, of course, working with force multipliers and affiliates. We always maintained and capitalized on the Commission's strong network. Internationally, Henry is here, of course, and of course, Jerald of SUAKAM, our brother and our sibling from Malaysia. We have maintained that, so our force multipliers are there. Of course, civil society. And then the fourth is continuously improving ourselves and anticipating the future, which is continuing internal capacity building for the Commission on Human Rights. As you know, we always try to be our best, and to be our best, we always have to continue building our capacity, learning from one another. And I hope I also learn from all of you in our interaction tonight. Next slide. So what I will give you are visuals that can give you a glimpse of how we are popularizing human rights in social media. We do have what you call the human rights-based approach. And we try to popularize the idea that people in government, state authorities are duty bearers, and the rights holders are the ones who are the citizens, their constituents, particularly the vulnerable, marginalized, and disadvantaged groups. So this is just an example of how we do it on social media. We are present on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and of course, we have our website as well. Next slide, please. So we do have, of course, what we call OK cards. What are they? In Filipino, it's called obligasyon, which is obligation, and karapatan, which is right. So it's okay. Okay or okay. So we do have, we do scan our media, print, broadcast to take a look at good examples of how human rights are actually expressed at the ground, in the ground, at the community level. So here you have a school producing nano alcohol and has been offered to be of use to sanitize hands during this public health emergency. And then we have, of course, a local government unit which has been named as a model city for disaster management. So these are just the new ones that we have encountered. Next slide, please. So we have, of course, I've been, in this lockdown, we've been asked to stay home since April 15. So I haven't been out since then. But I haven't been disconnected. I have been distanced, but not disconnected. So we've had many webinars such as this. Next slide, please. So just to give you some examples of how we did it, we do have a, what you call a homeschooling. That was a previous one. And this one is a recent one. Just last May 20, we talked about the rights of arrestees and persons under custodial investigation, especially during this time when visits are not allowed in jails. And there are many checkpoints, many who violate because they need to go out to get food, to work because they're daily wage earners, etc. So we did this to our partners, the AiNNI Human Rights Center, and also the Task Force Detainees of the Philippines. Next slide, please. So we do actually measure how we are effective. And these are just some of the statistics that we've had in the past 3 months or the first quarter of 2020. And we are one of the government agencies. If you revisit the slide on the constitutional bodies, we are happy to note that we have the most likes on Facebook among all the 5 constitutional bodies. And we do have a lot of feedback on engaging posts that we've had. So one of the things that we also employ, we try to employ a little bit of humor into it to make it more popular among the youth. Next slide, please. So we have continuing monitoring of human rights. This is a picture of our director of the National Capital Region, and this is actually a case that that went viral because if you see the bookcase behind the second picture on your right, that hides a door to a secret detention facility that we've uncovered. So we saw how inhuman conditions there were at the time, and it housed about maybe around 12 to 15 people in a 1 by 5 meter dark space in that area, which was covered by a cupboard. Next slide, please. The next slide is about a picture on the National Inquiry on Climate Change. This is actually something of a breakthrough or a landmark case because Greenpeace was the one who gave us or who petitioned us to actually take a look at the effects of carbon major activities in the world and taking a look at how climate change has been affected by that, but the human rights impact of climate change. And as you can see here, we had members of the indigenous peoples community testifying in that inquiry. The next is the interim prevention. That's the next slide. And this is all about, of course, trying to, since we have a broad mandate on visitorial of detention facilities, and the law has not yet been in place to be able to comply with the second optional protocol against torture to be able to designate or establish a preventive mechanism to prevent torture, cruel, inhuman, degrading treatment in our detention facilities, we have come up with a mechanism that would allow us to operate as an interim national preventive mechanism. Next slide, please. Our next slide talks about a human rights observatory, and we chose an observatory that took a look at gender-based violence, rights of indigenous peoples, and also the rights of migrant workers. So this is like a think tank and would be something of a, it talks about data and how to analyze it so that we can generate more evidence-based research on human rights and the impact of human rights in these particular sectors. Next slide. It's a picture of Universal Periodic Review where I actually intervened on the floor before the Human Rights Council when the Philippines was under review. And this was at the time when, of course, it's still present up to now when the killings have been actually unprecedented killings as a result of what this government calls the drug war in the Philippines. Next slide, please. So we do work with local partners. On the next slide, you will see a picture down below. It's an effort in civil society with a particular government agency called the Council for the Welfare of Children when there were proposals in Congress to lower the age of minimum age of criminal responsibility from 15 to 9 years old. So this is something that we've been actually guarding against because we do not want the minimum age of criminal responsibility, of course, to be lowered. We want it higher, in fact, because we of course know that in the Child Rights Convention, this is a backsliding which is not allowed if you are a state party to the Convention on the Rights of the Child. Next slide talks about our relationship with other national human rights institutions. We do have a memorandum or a cooperation agreement with the National Human Rights Commission of Qatar. We do have one also with Jordan, but the most active right now is the one with Qatar. And of course, we had, of course, a meeting with the National Human Rights Commission of Nepal on migrant workers' rights. Next slide, please. This one is, of course, about capacity building. Oh, networking with international human rights partners. Again, with the Human Rights Commission of Malaysia. I don't think, Jerald was there in that meeting. And then, of course, we did have the Southeast Asia NHRI Forum, which is a group of Commission on Human Rights counterparts, our brothers and sisters in Southeast Asia. We have right now, I think, 6 members, Malaysia, of course, Thailand, Indonesia, the Philippines, Timor-Leste, and Myanmar. Next slide, please. And now I talk about the last part, which is why we have sustained interest to work towards making human rights protection real through maintaining good working relationships with partners. And let me see. Okay. So, okay, evidence-based policy recommendations. We've just to give you some examples, we did. In the middle, you will see Let Our Voices Be Heard. We did conduct a reproductive health rights inquiry, and we did find out a lot of many problems about reproductive health and the access of women and families to reproductive health services and commodities. And what we found out, of course, are the vulnerable groups. Women with disabilities have more difficult time. Of course, here we are at odds with the Roman Catholic Church in this regard. So we've encountered many women buying birth control pills and all that. We did an inquiry on indigenous peoples as well as a situationer on Filipino children in this drug war. Next slide, please. Okay, so this one is a learning session on, of course, CHR development stuff. We do have writing workshops. We have investigation workshops, etc. And we do have a lot of that. Thanks, many thanks, of course, to our partners as well, including the APF or the Asia Pacific Forum. I understand Roslyn also shared with you her thoughts earlier. Next slide, please. So the last part is why have we sustained interest to work towards making human rights protection real through us? Of course, national human rights institutions are actually a tool for justice. And that justice, it's access to justice really. I go back to that issue about being a bridge. And then taking a look at if justice cannot be cannot be obtained here, we can always go outside and look at the international mechanisms. And I also say this also to my audience. I think the greatest gift of human rights is that we are able to question our own government and go outside of it, go to several international forums to be able to speak out and say, look, my human rights are being trampled upon by my government. So the international human rights mechanisms are in place, not only the treaty body mechanisms, but also the special procedures mechanisms to be able to ensure that government is kept honest about human rights and to ensure that, to say that people are watching, mechanisms are there to ensure that the actions of government are there. It's no longer a state-to-state conversation that says, you know, this is a domestic issue, don't meddle in it. Human rights has broken that particular mold. What we have right now is human rights protection on the ground using several mechanisms. So just some thoughts. We play a major role in a country's human rights protection system. We ensure compliance with national laws and practices for international human rights. We do monitor these laws to be compliant with the obligations of human rights treaties, where we are a state party to, and of course, those that are absolutely prohibited in the international law, and they're called jus cogens or peremptory norms, like the proscription of torture, for instance. We don't really need anything to be able to say that torture will be allowed in extra special circumstance because it's absolutely prohibited. And then, of course, we monitor and address at the national level core human rights concerns, again, as I've said earlier. Next slide is we support the work of human rights defenders and contribute to the eradication of all forms of discrimination. Just last week, we issued a statement and an advisory in support of a law that talks about anti-discrimination or punishes discrimination of COVID-associated persons, including health personnel who have been health frontliners, health workers who have been actually booted out of their homes because people are scared that they might get the virus, and other discriminatory practices against COVID-associated persons. So, but mainly, it's really for social justice. It's not only for formal justice. We are here for social justice. Just to let you in on something that in our constitution, we are actually found in Article 13, which is actually entitled social justice and human. So they're really linked together. So NHRIs also secure human dignity across generations. And what we're talking about here is the Merida Declaration, which is the role of NHRIs in implementing the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. This is something that perhaps we can go through, but just to say that, of course, a human rights-based approach is there. And what do we mean by that? We don't only mean identifying duty bearers and rights holders, but what's more important is to be able to analyze and define the relationship, the power relations that go with a situation, and take a look at that and make sure that human rights, it's anchored on human rights, and to be able to address violations or issues and concerns, we must be able to take a look at those power relations. Next slide, please. Which is, I think, yeah, second to the last slide is, of course, we engage duty bearers, as I've said, rights holders and other key actors to raise awareness and build trust and promote dialogue and concerted efforts. And the last, of course, is to ensure that, last slide, is we must be able to monitor progress, assist in shaping global national indicators. Next slide, that's the next slide. And engage, of course, with government, to hold them accountable for just to show you a map of the Philippines and where we're located. We're all over the Philippines. And just as a last note, national human rights institutions like the Philippines would like to also be able to operate in transactions. What I mean is, of course, human rights come alive, are violated, are also addressed in the communities, but we must be able to also do it in an approach that is transformational. So one of the things that we're trying to do is trying to ensure that all these good practices are replicated, improved, and enhanced, so that we are able to ensure that human rights is people will realize that human rights is part of their lives. It's not only civil and political rights, it's the air we breathe. It's when we go out, take a walk, or ensure that the current health crisis will allow us to have access to vaccines and be able to get the help that we can that we need if we are infected of the virus. So that's all. I'm sorry I might have taken a little bit more time, but thank you for your attention, and I'd love to hear your questions and maybe your thoughts on my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. I hope I'm audible.
Yes, you are.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Karen. I'm sorry, half an hour for a whole commission presentation is difficult, but you people do 10 minutes in an APF meeting. I just want to add one thing which had always interested me in your commission, was that the trainings you do on investigation are not investigation for your on criminal investigations, but on human rights investigations. I remember coming to your commission and then sitting there till I got a copy of the manual for training of investigators, because you spoke about human rights training, whereas other commissions talk about criminal investigations that are undertaken. And another thing was also that you monitor large processions. Large processions held in your country are monitored by functionaries appointed by the commission. We always used to think if that had happened and we had monitors of the SHRC or NHRC in Thoothukudi on 22nd of May 2018, what happened may not have happened. So these are good practices that are sometimes best practices. They may not accept it to be best, but they're definitely good practices. Thank you very much. We will immediately move on to welcoming our next guest. We have with us Jerald Joseph, the Honorable Commissioner for the Human Rights Commission of Malaysia, known as SUAKAM. SUAKAM is the name of the commission. Like we call our commission the NHRC, they call it the SUAKAM. For the last 25 years, Jerald has been human rights defender and trainer. And out of these 25 years, he'll have to answer how many years we know each other. A consultant at both local and international levels on human rights issues concerning the rights of indigenous people, elimination of racial discrimination, and economic, social, and cultural rights. Pioneering the program of non-discrimination in 2006 in Malaysian CSO context, he has developed advocacy and education tools on combating racial discrimination. He is a senior CSO member in Malaysia who has led the Malaysian NGOs reporting to the UPR working group in Geneva. He was the chairman of the ASEAN People's Forum. It's another APF. It is not the same APF you were introduced this morning. ASEAN People's Forum, process in 2006-2007. He has served as a member of various human rights CSOs, including the Commonwealth Foundation Advisory Body, the Asia South Pacific Bureau of Adult Education, Asia Pacific NGO Steering Committee of the World Conference Against Racism, where we met each other. He is a board member of the Pusat Komas and Greenpeace Southeast Asia. Mr. Jerald Joseph is at present a commissioner, Honorable Commissioner of SUAKAM for the term 2016-2019 and now extended till 2022. Warm welcome, Jerald. Warm welcome.
Thank you.
Warm welcome. Thank you for accepting to be with us. People will be wondering, Philippines, Malaysia, no other South Asia. Well, we wanted to give you good examples. That is why we went in so far. And I used to say this, and I have good stories from Malaysia, which I will keep till the end. I will not say it now, so I don't want to take it out of this basket. Thank you, Jerald. Jerald, you have exactly 30 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Henry. Good to see you. Yeah, I think Henry and I, it's the probably 20th anniversary since the World Conference Against Racism. Hi, Commissioner Karen. Good to see you. And Eid Mubarak greetings to Muslim friends who are on this network. It's very funny to have a training where the numbers say 189 participants, but you're clueless who is this, and so it's like it's a very strange way. It's better to see small faces everywhere and be convinced you're not talking to yourself. But thank you for the invitation to speak today.
We are following you very, very carefully, very carefully. And on the screen, you will see a gentleman, Anil Parashar, who was in the Indian Commission.
Okay.
Wave nicely, Mr. Parashar. Wave nicely.
Hi. Okay, so I think with the limited time, I think a lot of the background work has been shared by. Oh, I must let me share my screen of the PowerPoint that I have. Share screen. Okay.
All right.
Okay, is it all right?
We can see.
Yeah, okay. So I think Commissioner Karen has given a lot of the background of what a commission's role and function should be. And many of it are the same for every commission, including our commission. And most of our commissions, in order to be relevant, to justify the name of a human rights commission, we have to fight our standards to comply with the Paris Principle. So A status is very important. It's not a guaranteed. The committee in Geneva is super crude and tough and hard as it should be. And so every 5 years we have to really prove to them that we comply. A little bit of background to friends on the network or the training. We are a fairly small country compared to Philippines and non-comparable to India, so I won't even try that. By term of size of place, we are 1/8 the size of India. We are 1/8 the annual GDP of India, but we are 5 times more than the GDP per capita of India. I'll give you one example. Adult literacy is very high, 93% compared to 63% in India, if I'm getting my facts right. So a little bit of background about Malaysia now as we see. But all this, I think all our data stopped once COVID started because the whole reset button is happening. I don't know what's the new data in all our worlds. But despite all the good-looking data about development which we have good roads, good buildings, good facilities, good schools. But many Malaysians for the last many decades have been clamoring for justice and human rights. This is a photo of a movement in the last 10 years for free and fair elections. And we actually celebrated the final result when in 2018, a government of 62 years old, the one and only government since independence, was thrown over by another government through elections, free and fair elections. So that new government brought us some hope of reform, but unfortunately that government was unseated, not through elections, just before the COVID-19 started. The core functions I won't go through is similar to what Commissioner Karen said. We have the function, our main function is to advise government in formulating their legislation. So we actually have to advise government. And this word advise, I think experienced lawyers like Henry can explain to you. Because for friends, when we say advice, people say, okay, done, I heard you. But actually, this advice is a legal, mandatory function that government should take heed of. And Malaysia Commission SUAKAM, we celebrated our 20th year as a commission last year. The starting point of the commission as activists, as Malaysians, we were very happy we finally had a commission, but I don't think it was motivated because anyone 20 years ago, at that time under Prime Minister Mahathir, I was actually believing in human rights. So I think it was more, there was a mood all over the countries to show that your government was actually complying. So they signed on to a lot of this. So you can inquire into complaints, you talk about treaties and awareness and education raising, which is very similar to what Commissioner Karen spoke earlier. And so this is the actual words of our function. You look at the A to F, to promote awareness of human rights, to undertake research. So we have a lot of leeway. What is research? What kind of research? That's our role. To advise government on the complaints against such authorities. So all our investigation, we should then direct our recommendations. We have a role to verify, study infringement of human rights, to visit places of detention, issue public statements on human rights, and to undertake any other appropriate activities as necessary. So which means the leeway is very broad, and this is why I've liked working in this commission. It's a small commission, but the openness of the act gives us, it depends very much on the set of commissioners. So if you have a set of commissioners who are bold, courageous, daring, then you can push the law much more, or push the function of the commission much more. And this is why I think it's important always to get a good set of commissioners that comply with the Paris Principle. But this is interesting. The scope of this, what human rights is very important, because first it says human rights refers to the fundamental liberties as enshrined in Part 2 of the Federal Constitution. In our Constitution, like the Indian Constitution, there's a section called Basic Liberties. So rights are enshrined there. But more interestingly is what I like is under Section 4, where it says, for the purpose of this act, regard shall be had to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights 1948, and to the extent that it's not inconsistent with the Federal Constitution. This is the first time in any written document in the country you had reference to a universal standard of human rights. And some courts have also referred now, some lawyers have taken this in the courts to prove their case. So the definition of human rights now is coming via the SUAKAM's work on defining what human rights, because we don't have a Human Rights Act. We don't really have a definition of human rights in any other act in our constitution. So this is similar. I will just skip this part, what I already spoke. So some of our activities, just to show you some photographs, we have this community engagement, which is part of our education. This is meeting a farmers group and a fisher folks group. So it's a really small community-led, and most of the time it turns out to be a lot of senior people bringing out their economic issues, fisher folks issues, their document issues. So it becomes like a place they come and tell their problems. So some of it we take it on as a human rights complaint, but some we refer them to agencies who will help them. But for many of them, it's actually a place where they want to come and talk about their issues. Then, of course, in the promotion and education, we always try to find a space to put our exhibitions or books. And this is, the context is different maybe from India, where you have much more space to talk human rights. The newspapers, television will give you more space. In Malaysia, in our history, that is not the case. It is a hard-fought space to get print media to cover you. It depends on the government of the day. The 60-year-old government was very tight in controlling the media. The last 2 years, when the new government took over, there's so much more space in the media. But now with basically a new type of government, which is linked to the previous old government, we fear that that space may not be existing anymore. Human rights training, you can see some examples. We do a lot of training for uniform enforcement officers. They are quite open to us. They may not agree with what we say, but training is one way that we can communicate with many of them. The prison department, for an example, has taken us as a partner, and they discuss with us very closely on many levels. Even at the highest policy level, when they're coming up with a national prison reform paper, they discuss with us first, got our input before they present it. People come to the commission to submit a complaint. Sometimes we go out and receive complaints. This is visiting detention centers, police lockups as part of our work. This is monitoring public assembly. You can see 3 commissioners on the left. I'm flanked by 2 other commissioners. So this was the free and fair election when we were out on the streets monitoring assemblies. We also participate with NGOs and other groups for campaigns. So one of the examples is of the Convention Against Torture. Malaysia has a very education, I think, in the world, especially in Southeast Asia. We ratified 3 child rights, the Children's Rights Convention, the CEDAW, the Women's Rights Convention, and people with disability. The rest are still hanging, and we were actually going to celebrate when we thought last year there was going to be 1 or 2 more conventions, but that took a turn for the worse when there was a very anti-international treaty fervor built from the ground, saying that would take away the sovereignty and it will affect the rights of Muslims and the majority Malay ethnic community. Promotion, I think similar to what Commissioner Karen showed, you print material, do short videos, you try your best, but honestly speaking, I'm not sure about Commissioner Karen in the Philippines, but in Malaysia, very difficult for us to get space in the television media and radio media as partners, as regular for education. So we've done a lot of print. Now online is a free space, but as mainstream media, it's still not been the easiest to get. And you don't see billboards here on human rights in Malaysia. And we were thinking that should be the way to go, but we're hoping it will change. This is a set of commissioners. So I'm with my colleagues, this present set of commissioners. Yeah. And they come from all parts of the country. Part of the Paris principles to ensure that there is a diversity of the set of commissioners. Commissioners in Malaysia, sadly, are not full-time commissioners, although the demand and the work is beyond full-time. You really have to spend a lot of time. But Many of them are actually professors, some have law firms, and I come from the NGO background, so I still am linked to an NGO, but I can't actually spend time there. But we spend most of our time in the Commission. And this is one of the reform that we are asking our government to change in the Act. This is an example. So the issues that come to us range from shooting, operation, the shooting. In this case was a recent case where police suspected someone, serious criminal, but this person had just was a Sri Lankan exile staying in UK with his wife and kids, and came for a holiday, and there was a chase, and the police said that they were part of a criminal gang, shot the man, and his cousin or accomplice both died, but the wife is still disappeared, and the children came here with the family and then have no parents now, and they had to go back to UK. So unanswered questions from the police on this matter. Indigenous people in some of the states, because land rights are still a big issue, these are they putting a blockade against logging camps to assert their right, and it was a very powerful move by them. And our commission actually did in 2013 completed a national for the government based on our work, meeting all of them. So we propose a full set of recommendations for the government to comply. It's been very slow, but they are still uncertain about their land rights. Then we have issues of coastal fisher folks, freshwater. I'm just giving you some examples of the variety of cases that they just want to be economic, take care of their economic as freshwater fisher folks or coastal fishermen who has been there for 200 years, and then a development project will impact their fishing rights. The issue of statelessness and undocumented person, I think this is very much linked to our joint project with the Commission of Human Rights Philippines and the Commission of Human Rights of Indonesia, Komnas HAM. We're trying to do a joint project to understand how to manage this issue of undocumentation in one state in Malaysia, in Sabah, Borneo. If you Google later, you can see Sabah. A huge issue of stateless and undocumented, and they live in conditions like this, so many of them do odd jobs, scavenging job, but yet they don't have documents. Children can't go to school. They get arrested, detained, deported, and the cycle will continue for generations. Another big issue in Malaysia, it's a multi-religious, multi-racial country with about 63% Muslims, and then maybe 20% Buddhist, Taoists, and maybe 10% Christians, 7% Hindus, about 8-9% indigenous tribal communities. So it's a mix, and that has always been Malaysia. But the issue of racism or racial discrimination has been a very regressive policy framework of the British and post-British of the Malaysian government. They've always tend to govern the country using the identity of ethnicity, what we call in Malaysia race. So political parties negotiate partnership according to, I represent the Muslim Malay group or the Indian group or the Chinese group. So that has been a big question about the issue of equality in the country, although it's in the constitution, but there is almost sometimes a double track of concept of equality where the majority has some privileges designed for a temporary period in the original design of the constitution, but now it has gone through almost as a right that is higher than the others. So this is a big issue. Freedom of religion is another big issue. I think India, you'll understand this issue. Another issue that the Commission was forced to manage was get involved to is the issue of free and fair election. The rally just now was the civil society, NGO movement, people's movement to build a mass power on the streets. But then they came to the Commission to also push us to take up this right to free and fair election, that we conducted studies, we did a regional workshop with the Kofi Annan Institute and presented our work to the government and the Election Commission of Malaysia. The Election Commission of Malaysia then, before 2018, was not seen as an independent commission. Yeah, that was the big issue. The work of all these are works of the commission, as I'm trying to explain how we work in the commission. The range of human rights is not confined to a small number of issues, because anyone can come and push us to do it. And sadly, our resources are very limited. We have only 85, I think maybe now 87 staff, and with 8 plus, now we have a children's commissioner, so 9 commissioners who are part-timers. And we have only 3 officers. So I think maybe the Philippines is far better managed or resourced in terms of its human resource and also officers spread out in the country, because it's also a different terrain. India, I think you have also commissions spread out all over the country. So the issue of budget is a very good point to maybe think about. If you want to have an independent commission, the government should not interfere or suppress or press the commission, but you also need to enable the commission to function. So our annual budgets have been dismal from our point of view. Generally, every year we get about $3 million a year annual budget. And that's very small in terms of allocation for other statutory bodies like the other commissions. So we've been pushing for government to increase more budget, but it's always a battle. And I think this is a big point. If you want to have a good commission, then the security of budget should not be in the hand of the executive. And this hand, it is in the hands of the executive. Maybe to go in a little bit deeper about our work, I just thought that the word SDG is such a popular word now, and I think even NHRIs already do work on SDGs. So we are called to give protection and fulfillment, to combat discrimination and harmful practices, which is a call of the SDG. And I think all the NHRIs are work in monitoring detention centers and investigation role actually helps in this part, because it gives voice to victims. Normally, when you don't go in, you don't get to know what's happening. And I think Commissioner Karen gave an example about the hidden room in one of their prison that they found out. So without going, you'll never know the real bad practices or drama that happens, because official reports are always okay, fine, unless a family member comes and speaks about torture or suspicious death in custody, So, and I work to propose policy practice. So this, I think, is already very much part of the SDG requirement, seeking remedies and early warning system. This is what the SDG was creating, was hoping to do in its indicator. So just picking that a bit further, the Commission has been visiting police lockup, prisons, immigration detention center, military detention. Also, we visited drug rehabilitation center, welfare homes that manage senior citizens' children, because we also got complaints from them. So we've just expanded our scope of the visiting, not just detention center as under criminal law, but also other forms of when you are in a home or center. These are what we normally do. I think it's similar to all commissions. Check on physical condition, facilities, healthcare is very important, personal hygiene, and sadly, we keep seeing in Malaysia, because of the conditions of overcrowding, both in prison and the immigration detention centers, which are 2 separate facilities. They are more cramped up, the water may not be that well, and the cleanliness. So I mean, and scabies is very prevalent. It's almost like a national detention disease. It's a tick mite, that bites on the skin and lives under there, and it can only be cleaned with dry air and killing the tick, the insect. But this is happening everywhere, and every time we go, people are complaining about this. Personal hygiene. I visited detention facilities where women were not given sanitary pads for their monthly period, and then I was asking how is it possible. Then an officer, and I'm speaking to women officers about this problem, and they said no, they help each other. They can even buy from there's kind of a small canteen. I said, but this is a right. I mean, they don't have the money. So we have this conversation ongoing, and it's a little bit strange that at this modern age, this is still not seen as a right for women's health. Food and nutrition, the quality depends on who gets the catering, and there's a question of why was this caterer given, whether there's corruption and the quality of food. So to that detail, we have to get on track with what's happening inside the detention centers. So how are they, why are they still there? Isn't there any way to push them out? What kind of program? I give you an example. Malaysia prisons now hold 73,000, I think, but the prisons are only designed for 53,000 or 50,000. So I think it's about 30% more than what is designed for. So you can imagine overcrowding. The prisons close to the capital city, Kuala Lumpur, is already double its capacity. So once it's double, mean the workforce is still about the same, and the prisoners wouldn't have the possibility to go out for a little bit of rest or leisure where you can walk around. So you're stuck in the facility because there's not enough prison officers to accompany you out. There's not enough place. So with overcrowding comes a whole other problem. And the welfare of the staff. So many times when we go and visit, we also get issues about the staff complaining to us. They say, what about our rights? Say, yes, you have rights for as a staff worker, and we also jot that down and make recommendations on that. This is an example of one of the police lockups we visited, very old, 100-over-year lockup, and it's horrible conditions, whoever lives there. The police officer was walking in front of me. I think it's suspected TB or some ailment after we had visited the center. The clothes I'm showing you on the right actually is when you get in the police lockup, you're given these clothes to wear. But I checked with some of them why they're not, how often do they change? Some detainees told me that they had it the whole period. Some are detained there for 14 days by another immigration act. And then I asked the police officer, well, we don't have the supply, and so we cannot give one set and take another set and wash. So because if you take one set and wash and one give, there'll be one group of people naked. So they say we've been asking and asking on the ground, but they cannot get, and the smell is horrible, and it's humid and hot. Because it's 100-year-old, it's an old prison converted to a police lockup. So we have things like this here that should not be allowed in anywhere. Another indicator of SDG is to look at the proportion of overall prison population. I spoke about that earlier. But 40% of those in prison are for drug-related offenses. So the question is, why are they in prison? Should they not be in a treatment and not part of the criminal justice system that puts them in jails? And 40 to 50% are remand, means they are waiting for their court cases, and this is an affront to their liberty, because you're not yet pronounced guilty, and why are you in prison? And the case takes very long, and there could be violent criminals that the law will give them to be remanded, but there are also petty offenders who are not violent and they just don't have the money to pay, but they also end up there. So I think part of our work is to work at major policy shift, and this is my example earlier of working with the prisons department, where they are fully working with us to try to push a shift in government, because they said prison is overcrowding, it should not be, and one professional prison. So we find them as our partner as we push the same agenda with the policymakers. Another question is for budgeting, human rights-based budgeting. This is an example I'm giving you to show that this is part of our advice to government, which is our most powerful work, is to propose budgeting response. At present, the police lockups where the death in custody has been happening quite high before, now it's gone down. There's no doctors on standby. So there's always a question of I didn't know his condition, and the family said they were tortured. And so we have proposed to have permanent centralized medical units within the lockups, the centralized bigger lockups in the big cities. And so finally, after many years of push, we've got the money, and the 5 are already ready to launch, but the COVID delayed it a bit, but the facilities are ready, our training is completed. And so the commission works with the police headquarters and with the Ministry of Health as a team for the last 2 years, meeting after meeting. Then we go to the Ministry of Finance and push them to give budget, which they gave some budget to the police. Strangely enough, they even signed a check to give to the commission in order to do this. And we said, no, you better just give it to the other side to build it. So that's an example of also looking at budgets for human rights. In our prisons, like I think similar to India, you have many old British period prisons, 100-over-year-old prisons still functioning. And their toilet are using that old almost manual scavenging type toilet, so bucket system. And so it's horrible for prisoners, for staff, and it's just not hygienic. So we've been pushing that no Malaysian, even the most smallest village, even some tribal villages, all have a proper modern type toilet with either pouring water or flush. But in our prisons, there's still 8 prisons that have a bucket system. But the good news, after 3 years of push, 2 have been converted. Budget for another 3 more have been approved. And now our battle is for the 3 oldest prisons. They said they don't want to touch, but we, the commission, have now engaged an architect, a heritage architect on our side to go in to have the battle of ideas with the government in order to prove to them that we can still bring in such facilities even in the oldest of prison. But all this also means money, so that's part of our work. Okay, I think I'm coming to the last part. Just give you an example of some works, issue of death in custody. So the numbers, I mean, this because Malaysia is a smaller population. I'm not sure about the Indian numbers, but the police lockup numbers have been going down, and that's very good news for us because of the big focus by NGO and the Commission on the issue of death in custody there. So these are just some examples of numbers. Police lockup deaths are always investigated by the coroner. But prisons and detention centers are still a big question mark. Only when it gets highlighted, and we are pushing that every death in custody needs to be investigated so that there will be no doubt in the minds of the people. I think this is the final photo before my closing words, is that this is an example of a very sad tragedy in Malaysia where 134 bodies were found in between the border of Thailand and North Malaysia. These are human trafficking camps that were bringing smuggling and trafficking Rohingyas mainly from Myanmar through the land, through Thailand, come to the border, across the border, and then transport to some people, some communities here. But when the camp was discovered, I think they've been operating for some time. There was already 134 people dead in some very shallow cemeteries in that camp in the deep jungle of the borders. So our question of the commission, we came up with a joint report with an international NGO. Who is responsible that these people could operate? Because we don't believe in the border area you can operate freely. There's no local partners. So our suspicion is there are collaborators, corrupt officials who are involved, and they should be brought to court. So we came up with a report. The previous government set up a Royal Commission of Inquiry. Sadly, we've not seen the final report of the Royal Commission of Inquiry, and we're hoping that will show something. But these are tombstones of the forensic department's painstaking work of trying to ascertain the DNA imprint of 134 individuals. So the people who died will never be known, and all we have is a number, that DNA number, remembering them. And this is sad because their identity as a person, they're not able to tell the family wouldn't know who died, and these are the works of just remembering a tragedy because there was lack of enforcement and human rights of people being smuggled and trafficked. So this photo then maybe brings to my final closing comments. I think a human rights commission is very much needed because we need oversight, check and balance. The duty and responsibility, as you must be studying now, is with the government, because government is duty bound to realize human rights for all in its land, in India or Malaysia or Philippines. So, but we have to push. Without oversight, governments abuse, governments take shortcut, like any organization, they do that. And so our role and function is to push, to take the advice, and for me, almost to give direction. So I think NHRIs must work in every country as a powerful check and balance. And usually they get into trouble with government because they were created by legislation and with the sanction of the government. But finally, as a check and balance, you are painful conscience to the government of the day, and they normally don't like what you say because public is also using our statements to criticize the government. But that's our role and function. I think some of the things we have done are also taking up difficult issues. We've done a national inquiry on the disappearance of 3 individuals linked to religion. One is a Christian pastor, another one is a Shia Muslim leader. Shia is a minority here and very difficult space because in Malaysia only Sunni Muslims are allowed to operate. Shias find it very difficult, and so there was a case that was we came up with a public inquiry, and our conclusion showed that there must be collusion by state enforcement agencies. The government set up a task force to investigate, and there's no report out. We did the national inquiry on policy for indigenous people. Our work on multi-stakeholder dialogue is important because sometimes in the previous history, government hardly invites NGOs to sit on the table. And SUAKAM used to be that space where we could invite both sides for what we call a round table discussion, and the government comes, and so NGOs also have a chance to speak. And more recently, the last 2 years, the Commission was able to organize the government of Malaysia, Foreign Minister and Foreign Ministry to have a direct dialogue with international NGOs based in Geneva to speak about human rights in Malaysia, which was never done before. Also, we take up difficult issues like LGBTIQ. We did a study on transsexual that is out, and in Malaysia is a very sensitive topic because of religion. And so now it's out, and we say we're not the proponents of any particular ideology or group, but everybody has human rights and we will defend that. And the final thing is also to work together with our human rights commissions in Philippines and Indonesia. And that's what I think we've worked together for the statelessness issue. That's another way of trying new things. So for me, I think there's no way to stop checking power. While I celebrated 2 years ago the change of government because it came in with the reform agenda, but governments change, and now that government has changed, and now I'm saying that I hope I can push the agenda. So check and balance is crucially important. Many quarters need voice, and the Commission is a place where they come and sometimes speak to us and speak to the media, and I'm totally comfortable if we can give voice to a group of people, because that's fine. I mean, let the people hear the voice. It is true. It's a job that is not fully appreciated. Government attacks us, but in our history, at the end of 2018, I think, we did a Human Rights Day celebration, and suddenly there was an anti-SUAKAM and basically an anti-international treaty on the CERT treaty, Ratification of Racial Discrimination. And they started saying if you ratify, you will lose your rights as a Muslim, as a Malay. And they went on a rampage, meaning a verbal rampage and a social media rampage. And 50,000 did a demonstration to defend Muslim Malay rights. So I think this is why we were also attacked. So it's unthankful job, but we have to keep at it. And I believe as we keep at it, one day we shall overcome. And I think the most difficult issues are what the Commission should do. And I agree the Commission has not been very loud on the issue of racism in Malaysia. And I think that's something that we must take up because that's the biggest pain in the country. So I think with that, I will end here. I think I've done my 30 minutes and I pass it back to Henry.
Yes, Jerald. Yes. I must tell these people a lot of things about you. I've enjoyed Jerald's presence in civil society. Now I enjoy him really, truly, speaking as a commissioner, and I've always done that. And I want to congratulate him for that. We have, as he said, we have journeyed together for 20 long years, as much as I remember. I hope I'm right.
That's true.
But I tell you, today you are under torture. One thing that I've never seen Jerald doing. Jerald is an extremely good trainer and facilitator. He doesn't sit. He doesn't sit. He makes everybody run. But I have seen that last 40 minutes or at least 5 minutes, I have locked him down to the chair. Not the commissioner is doing a training program. I've never done this in my life. Yes, sir, I was just thinking, what a sin. Yeah. Friends, I have a very special relationship with Malaysia. I have this, you remember, Rosalind this morning spoke about Malaysia. And of course, we had some work to be done with Malaysia, which I will repeat now. So immediately after this, I will take the floor for 5 minutes officially on AiNNI. You see how small we make AiNNI? Just 5 minutes, because we are a small little mosquito, AiNNI. And then another small little mosquito, the AiNNI in India, the platform in India. And then we open up for questions because I think participants need to ask questions. Friends, AiNNI is the Asian network of NGOs working with these people. That's it. We are a very simple body. We are only NGOs, but who work with Karen. NGOs who work with Jerald, not on an individual basis, but with their commissions. We are about 36 members. It's a membership-based body in 21 countries. We were born as a result of a walkout. A walkout. These people don't know that. It was in the year 2005, if I remember right, when, yes, it was 2005, when the Asia Pacific Forum of National Human Rights Institution had its 10th APF conference in Mongolia. The NGOs who were invited there, and for who 10 long years were never allowed to speak, but only make a 3-minute statement at the end of the conference, said, enough is enough. We walk out of your conference. That walkout took place in 2005. People got bothered, NGOs walking out. What? They never lose anything because they lose only those 3 minutes great input that we give from the NGOs in a 3-day conference of the APF. But that created the birth process of AiNNI, which is today in 21 countries with 36 members. And I want to recognize Anselmo Lee from South Korea, a close friend of some of us for many, many years, who happened to be the executive director of Forum Asia at that time, who initiated this process. He's a crazy chap who initiates and lots of crazy things like this. But this is something as crazy as he always is. And beautiful processes. He's a builder of platforms and institutions. And we still remember him with great respect for what he did. Now, there are 5 different activities that we engage in AiNNI. Simple activities. But these are small little bombs you place in different places. The first thing we said was we will monitor. You remember what Sailesh Gandhi ended yesterday. Civil society has to monitor. We monitor national human rights institutions and every year come out with an annual report. And I'm showing you 2008, 2009, 2010, 2011, 12, 13. It goes on till 18 and 19. Every year an annual report, which has chapters on every national human rights institution. And the interesting thing that AiNNI used to do is to release these reports at the time of the APF conference. And somehow we had very good chairpersons who would come to release the reports. And therefore, therefore the reports became important. Then in the beginning, I don't think people were reading it. Karen will support me. They may not have been reading it very seriously. Then they started seeing there are all sorts of things about us inside. So we definitely need to read. Then they not only read, Parashar will remember they used to prepare para-wise remarks about reports inside. Para-wise remarks. This is wrong, that is wrong, this is wrong, that is wrong, this is wrong. The engagement started. And this engagement today, my dear friends, has turned out to be a very positive engagement, where commissions feel embarrassed sometimes, but they know that things which are inside are usually fair. And so AiNNI also has now said, we will come out with a report, but the 5 pages on Philippines will be shared with the Philippines Commission before it is published here. This is the type of engagement we have got into. That is our one activity. Our second activity was about the SCA process, the Sub-Commission on Accreditation that Rosalind was talking this morning, where they get a A-grade status or B-grade, and both our commissioners today were talking how difficult the process has become. We usually from AiNNI ensure that there is a shadow report on the commission. And that is a shadow report on SUAKAM that I was engaged in 2010. And I remember my good friend John, those days in civil society, using me to raise questions to the Malaysian Commission. And your Commissioner, Simon, frowning at me and saying, but why are you from India interested in Malaysia? And to make the story short, I am very proud of the process that the Malaysian Commission went. It was never downgraded, but they of course got a new law, which was because of the process of the Subcommittee on Accreditation. So we intervene through shadow reports, alternative reports to the Subcommittee on Accreditation of the GANRI to ensure that these commissions are challenged. The third, of course, we attend conferences of the ICC and GANRI and then raise questions, contribute to documents, etc. The fourth, in the UPR process, somebody asked in the morning, yes, in the UPR process, we see that we ask 1 or 2 interesting questions to Philippines, we ask 1 or 2 interesting questions to Malaysia, we ask 1 or 2 interesting questions to India, all relating to national human rights institutions, so that the agenda of national human rights institutions is elevated to the UPR process. And the last, and I'll finish here. National human rights institutions are also sometimes under attack. Don't think they are not under attack. They are under attack. And I want to tell you, and I usually used to be very passionate in this, very passionate. I have met her with Karen in the office, their chief commissioner or chairperson. I always don't get her name, but she is in prison today in the Philippines. Not because of what she did in the commission, but because she had the courage after her term to raise questions about certain human rights violators in her country, and that landed her in prison. Now, this is a time when AiNNI is in solidarity with the Commission, and when people in the Commission are harassed, it is our time to speak, because Karen for us is a human rights defender. Jerald is a human rights defender. Their members are human rights defenders as much as we are. They are commissioners, yes, but they're also human rights defenders. And if the state dares attack them, it is the responsibility of a civil society organization to speak. We have done it in the case of Philippines. We have done it in the case of Maldives at one point of time. We have done it in the case of other countries. I won't name them now for the sake of time, but that is the way AiNNI works. AiNNI works not only with the commissions, it works with the APF, and we try to see that this vigilant eye on the performance of national human rights institutions is performed in a responsible manner. I want to emphasize this, a responsible manner. It's very difficult. It's a very difficult task. It's a small task, but a very difficult task. And this is the only creature we have globally. The Asia-Pacific region alone has this. The other regions don't have it. I will stop here. I will now invite my good friend, Mathew Jacob, who needs no introduction. All of you know him, but all of you don't see him. You always see him behind the screen. Today you can see him there. Mathew is the National Coordinator of the Human Rights Defenders Alert India. He's also the National Coordinator of the All India Network of individuals and NGOs working with national and state human rights institutions in India. Over to you, Mathew.
Thank you, Henry. Thank you, everyone. Very quick presentation because we have very less time. As Salesh Gandhi spoke yesterday with regard to civil society advocating for a lot of commissions, but not monitoring them. So that is where AiNNI started in 2010, trying to be a national network of individuals and NGOs, you can see it in the name itself, which can monitor the functioning of these institutions. So basically a civil society-led monitoring of national and state human rights institutions, a very unique platform, maybe very strengthened platform in India and in some other countries. I will not go into too much details with regard to NHRC or what we do, but specifically of what we have done. Henry spoke about with regard to the functions of AiNNI, and functions of AiNNI, the Asian NGO network, is at the regional level, at the Asian level. So now when it's happening at the regional level, if it has to have some meaning, there needs to be certain kind of actions at the national level, which only help us to amplify what we're trying to do nationally and internationally. In the past 1 decade, some of the key initiatives which we have taken are interventions during the NHRC's accreditation process. I will tell you about that. Memorandums, engagement with GANRI, APF, OICHR and other UN bodies, training for civil societies, and advocacy with lawmakers. But before going into any of this, one of the key work and ongoing work of AiNNI has been the right to information. So like we constantly use right to information applications to monitor the functioning of various commissions, but also the composition of various commissions. For example, an year back, and which we do it annually, is to file RTIs with regard to know the status of each commission. For example, with regard to state human rights commissions in India, we have close to 28-30 state human rights commissions in India. But in how many commissions are there members? How many commissions there are chairpersons? How many commissions do they have the investigation head? Do they have their own building? Do they have infrastructure, etc.? So we use RTIs to gather information, but we are unable to use this information in form of a document publication so far, but we have managed to share this information with concerned civil society organizations and the non-governmental organizations or individual activists for actions at their end. For example, some of them have moved public interest litigations in various high courts across the country. They have issued memorandums to the government or to the governor in that particular state, signature campaigns, various actions which they deem fit is appropriate in their own state. However, information which you obtain with regard to the NHRC is used in the annual submissions which you make to AiNNI, which Henry just spoke about. So I will explain to it, and where all these are, I have compiled all this together so that some of you who are interested with regard to reading this more, to know this more, can go back and always read about it, what we have done. Now, one ongoing work is with regard to submission of memorandums. Now you may ask, why memorandums? Unlike what we heard from Jerald or Karen with regard to Malaysia and Philippines respectively, we have comparatively very less space when we deal with these commissions. Civil society is nowhere consulted or even brought into the ambit with regard to appointments, with regard to the functioning. It's always a one-way traffic. But when there are certain things which we feel are concerned with regard to the independence of the institution, or with regard to autonomy of the institution, or with regard to any operational function of this particular institution, we try to use memorandum to give us the space to at least voice our opinion through a collective civil society platform. And at the same time, these are also an opportunity to educate the lawmakers, the decision makers, who may be ill-informed, who may not be appropriately informed with regard to certain facts, with regard to how things need to move. and also bringing them closer with the international jurisprudence, international developments. For example, in the resource materials which have come to you, one folder is called with regard to memorandum. So in that folder, I have tried to place 5 recent memorandums. Now you will see there's a memorandum with regard to challenging the appointment of a member of the NHRC who was declared a member of the NHRC, but who was also vice president of the current government, the Bharatiya Janata Party. So now when this was done, is for the first time, very openly, NHRC was about to have a very political appointment. There was a memorandum done. We tried to do media advocacy as well, which helped us to stop this appointment and to ensure some component with regard to Paris Principle and its compliance are met. Similarly, other memorandums, and we also use memorandums where SHRIs need help. For example, in the case of Manipur State Human Rights Commission, now the State Human Rights Commission has now been appointed after almost 11 years of the last commission. So 11 years of gap, a member has been appointed. There's no chairperson, there is no second member, there is no staff, there is no vehicle, there is no infrastructure. So on behalf of that particular State Human Rights Commission, of the Manipur State Human Rights Commission, we try to we developed a memorandum and submitted to the governor, to the chief minister, to the appointment committee members and various other authorities, which are now being followed up by the local groups in Manipur. So memorandum as a tool which we have constantly used from the platform of AiNNI. I'm running fast, I'm sorry. Again, another set of functions with regard to trainings and consultations. Content are more or less same for both. How to access the human rights institutions, what are their powers, how to monitor them using the RTIs, sharing our own experiences with them. But we call it consultations when we do it with the commissioners of various human rights institutions, because they would not like to be called for a training program. So this hierarchies is something we have to manage. So different terminologies we have to use at different point of time. Now, advocacy with lawmakers, another key function of AiNNI. Now, again, this is put in the materials for you. If someone spoke, one of the speakers spoke about the Amendments to Protection of Human Rights Act in July last year. And that was a time when how we discussed and viewed the amendments with regard to the National Human Rights Commission. Instead of furthering NHRC's compliance with Paris principles, these amendments are surely going to bring down the compliance levels. So when the government introduced, the state minister introduced in the parliament, both houses of the parliament, the government put it the minister said it's with regard to greater independence, the greater autonomy, with regard to making the NHRC more compliant with Paris principle. But I think there was some kind of shock to the government when a lot of opposition members, when many members of parliament from various political parties in both Lok Sabha and the Rajya Sabha, the lower house and the upper house, spoke, read out based on our submission, and they quoted Paris principle extensively. The general observations made by the Paris principles, and with regard to the recommendations India has received in various accreditation. So at some level, the advocacy with lawmakers is also engagement with lawmakers at multiple points of time during the amendment processes or otherwise, so that we are able to also educate the parliamentarians, also bring in the developments with regard to jurisprudence with regard to national and state human rights institutions. So in one folder, you will find with regard the proposed amendment by the government, and in the same folder, you will find a detailed submission by us, where we are saying how every amendment is going to challenge the independence and plurality of the National Human Rights Commission. This is what Henry spoke about. We are doing every year report submission. Again, in the folder with regard to India, you can see 3 reports of the past 3 years we have put to AiNNI. You can go and read those reports with regard to the Indian NHRC. Now, accreditation. Now, this is something which we have been doing it. I'll just take 2 minutes on this very dedicatedly for the past, since 2011. The 2011, when Indian NHRC came for accreditation, AiNNI submitted a report, and the report had a forward, but none other than Justice J.S. Verma, who was a former chairperson of the NHRC. And the report was extremely critical about the NHRC's functioning, which NHRC also gave a para by para response to that particular report. NHRC retained the A grade, but there were some very good observations which came out from that particular report. 2016, again when the NHRC came for accreditation, AiNNI submitted the report. And the Indian NHRC for the very first time since his first assessment in 2006, that his assessment was deferred by 1 year. And this was based on the submissions made by AiNNI. So now when we go to NHRC, and Parashar will know, and when I've personally seen in some meetings of APF, NHRC has a big file, and the file is called AiNNI. So all what we submit and write, they have maintained that in that particular file. And they come to all the meetings with that particular file. But in 2017, when the NHRC again was 2016 was deferred, 2017 it again went. This time that was 25 years of NHRC, and it was granted an A grade again. But there were again similar observations. And since all of us are listening, even we feel that international bodies like SCA are not devoid of pressures which some commissions may put. The observations were same, everything was same, but still they managed to get an A grade. And for the first time in the history of SCA, that based on the commitments made, verbal commitments made by NHRI, that was given accreditation. In none in the past, it was done. And AiNNI did not stop there. We also made a challenge with regard to that. Just 1 minute, Henry. Challenge with regard to that. And we place it on record, our discontent. But why accreditation is important? And I will end it over here. Accreditation is important. A, it gives the legitimacy to the governments that they have institutions which are compliant to certain international principles, which are human rights institutions. B, this gives access to these human rights institutions to various international platforms where they play a very important role, but on certain occasions, they also complement what the government says. C, it covers the overall image of the situation of human rights in a particular country. So this entire accreditation system, more than being just a Paris principle compliant assessment system, has also a lot of other deeper political meaning which we try to engage with. Thank you.
Mathew, I know it is very, very difficult to do this, but there was no other go. We want to respect our participants. Open the floor for questions. Our participants have some questions. Rajvel?
Yeah. So due to short of span of time, I've selected one question each to Karen and Jerald. So the first one is to Karen. This is about the war on drugs in Philippines and the extrajudicial executions in Philippines. How did CHR intervene in these cases, and how do you deal with impunity of security forces in these kind of human rights violations?
Shall I answer now?
Yeah. Yes,
please. Well, on the war on drugs, we've been actually the problem there is when I mentioned that when Henry mentioned that the commission is also under attack. The current tack of this administration is really to demonize human rights and to demonize the Commission on Human Rights. And this has been one great difficulty that we've had, because it's like we were, the first 6 months of this administration, we were like, what do you call this? We were floored. We were in shock and awe because of the tremendous popularity of this administration continuing to this day. And the narrative that the people who use drugs are the ones that are the enemy and not just the drugs. So it's been quite difficult. But we did have some leeway because, like for instance, the secret detention cell that I showed you behind the cupboard is one of the cases that it was really a drug case. These about 12 to 15 people were actually arbitrarily detained in a secret detention facility. And that was because of drugs, and they were being used as cash cows by the law enforcement authorities who were manning the precinct so that they can get more money out of them. So that's one. They were caught red-handed. In another case, there was this boy who was a high school student who the police initially reported as resisting arrest and having a gun, etc. But then the CCTV camera got a shot of this, and it was totally untrue. So there are leeways, there are breakthroughs in certain cases, but never received as much non-cooperation as we have had now, which is really an indication that government is totally unwilling to cooperate with us and trying to find out who the real culprits are when it comes to drug killing. So in effect, that we've also spoken against this. We've also appealed to government. We have raised this issue in the international level and tried to get international solidarity going so that this government realizes that the world is watching. And then, of course, you have the ICC, that was the International Criminal Court. There was a case filed there by NGOs and certain high-profile personalities. We've been cooperating with these people who actually filed the case. Also, in terms of inquiries, we've done informal inquiries on it as well. But we do have our own cases, and we can show for sure that there is a refusal to cooperate by government in so many cases. Of course, the other platform is the Human Rights Council. Just last year issued a resolution where the OHC-HR must be able to monitor and report to the next Human Rights Council session the situation of the Philippines, the human rights situation of the Philippines. Never has it happened before that we were a subject of a resolution that would make the OHC-HR report on our situation. Never has it happened before. But this was undertaken through solidarity with the states who sponsored and voted yes to this particular proposal of Iceland. And we did have a lot of briefings with civil society, not only locally but internationally as well. And all the diplomatic corps, we also had a briefing with them. I hope that answers your question. I have a lot more to say, but there's no more time.
Thank you, Karen, for that. But I think our participants need to know and listen carefully. It's the last few minutes, but listen carefully. This commission in the Philippines had problems getting their budget passed by their government. That is the extent to which they have been monitoring human rights efficiently within their powers. I will leave it at that. I thought now that you have opened the box, I did not want to say it earlier, but you opened it, and therefore I want our people to know, because this is the extent of trouble that you can have. We have seen it, my dear friends. We have spoken about the Legal Services Authority in Tamil Nadu. You remember when they were taking cases against the government of Tamil Nadu, that their budget was stopped. It's a parallel story of the Commission on Human Rights, and the whole world knew that their token passing was $10. If I'm right, $10 was passed in the first house, and then of course the whole solidarity movement around the globe within the country worked, and then they got their budget. But that was the extent to which they were putting pressure on the government and monitoring the government. Thank you, Karen. Lots of thanks to you and all your colleagues and your chair and to all your staff members there. Second question, Raj?
Yeah. This to Jerald. Hi, Jerald. The question is regarding statelessness and undocumented migrants issue. What are the positive measures that the Malaysian government has taken with the inputs from SUAKAM? And also if you could briefly tell about the recent intervention with respect to the arrest of undocumented migrant workers.
Sorry, can you repeat the question again? I lost you for a bit there.
So this is regarding This is regarding statelessness and undocumented migrants issue. What are the positive measures that the Malaysian government has taken with the inputs from SUAKAM? Okay. And also about your recent intervention with respect to the arrest of undocumented migrant workers due to COVID.
Okay. Yes, I think the issue of statelessness is a huge issue that no politician will want to take it up because you just can't win with it, however good you are. It's a political suicide to speak about foreigner for first and more so for the undocumented person. So I think this policy push from us was one way of bringing it at the national agenda. So we worked with the state government of Sabah, and that's why we have this joint collaboration with the NHRI of Philippines and Indonesia on actually speaking directly to the issue, because the issue has many layers. It has a political dimension because it's cross-border, historical, and more complicated because the Philippines has a historical claim on Sabah. So there are many layers that need to be unpacked, and as a commission, we can probably move much more freer than the political entities that are stuck by politics. So I think we've been pushing that, first of all, rights has to be reaffirmed no matter with or without document. And then I think you get traction when the public hears that children without document cannot go to school and they're left loitering. Then there's a different kind of response. But the public response according to the mood of the time and divisiveness of politicians who play with fire. And then let's link to your second question, Rajavelu, about the present, the more present issue of COVID. I was a bit late earlier because there was a television interview asking the same question. How does the government react to the treatment? Now, by and large, the last 2 months, the Malaysian government has been very strict and systematic approach to handling COVID all over the country. A very good response. The numbers came down. Last week, it came down to like 24 to 35. And then suddenly, the last 3 days, it started going up 62, 170, and 187 today. And the majority, 90% of these numbers are in the immigration detention centers because of the raids that were conducted just the last 2 weeks. And this was why we were kept pushing and telling the government there was no urgency to do the raids. I mean, it's a show of force, but why take the risk when public health is at danger and you will scare those without documents from ever coming out? And we told them that the initial message from the Ministry of Health was clear. Anyone could walk into any hospital, and if you have the symptoms, you will be checked, tested, diagnosed, and also admitted. And so, but then they changed track to show the power, and that's when they started talking using the word of sovereignty, and we cannot give the message. And but my point to them is, what message? These people are already here. The message is the government has failed in stopping workers being exploited or running across borders without documents. The failure is what we see, but this is not the moment to try to kick them out, because, and it's so symbolic, the last 3 raids within the confines of the lockdown, that we got this emergency lockdown where there's barbed wires when the cases spike. No one can go in or come out. They did the raids in those places. And then those who were outside heard about this and everybody went quiet and hiding. So I said, what is the point of arresting 500 here, 300 there, 200, when there's still hundreds of thousands, even up to 1 million or million plus, who don't have documents? So you symbolically show your might, but you're not addressing the issue. And this has been what I call in their mind the systematic approach to an unsystematic way of resolving the issue. So I think and this against the background of people feeling very worried, jobs are lost, economic. So there was a fervor of xenophobia that has been growing. And public is so easy to grow and pick up on any issue, social media and hate speech grows. But my question is, what is the role of government? What is the role of politics when hate speech is on fire? You should not add anything to that. You should play your role as statesman to stop it. But sadly, no one stopped it. Some even ask questions about this and say we have to take a strong approach. Now they're getting angry that the numbers have spiked, and we already prepared ourselves for the numbers to spike like Singapore. But it's contained within the facilities of detention. But there's still many more detained, and we are worried that others outside who are afraid to come on board. And this is a disaster in public health management, which they were doing very well for 2 months. But the last 2 weeks, I think security-minded people started to push their authority, and public health officials had to cave into them. So I think that's the Commissioner will keep speaking up. But just the last point is, as we speak up on the social media, the Commission, SUAKAM, is being attacked by public who says we are only interested in foreigners and we don't care about Malaysians, we lost our lives, we have no job. So even to change that thinking is getting more difficult because the negative grows so much faster than the positive. Thank you. Thank you, Henry.
Thank you. Thank you. And all of us here are so appreciative, Jerald. You people speak about COVID. Our people are under lockdown themselves. The whole country has opened, but our commissions are under lockdown. Because I think there is another Gandhi APF advice going to them to say, please look after yourselves. Don't be bothered about the country. Look after yourself. So we have senior citizens in our commission, and I'm saying with great pain of some of our members remaining at home and not looking at files because they have to look after themselves. They are old men of our country. Old men of our country. That's the least I can tell you. And so it's so refreshing for us to hear you, Jerald, how your commission is concerned about the health scenario and what is happening. And whereas for us, at this point of time, as the session was going on, my dear friends, Gautam Navlaka, whose bail was to be heard tomorrow, was whisked away today. A human rights defender of national repute was whisked away today from Delhi to Mumbai by train. A person with a whole set of medical complications to be taken to Mumbai, where the deaths are taking place. The worst scenario. And my Human Rights Commission is extremely silent because we have been told to be silent. And in this in this difficulty, you are signs of hope, dear Karen and Jerald. The work that you people do, there needs to be hope built with us that these are possible. It is not that people like Henry are not mad fellows crying for national and state human rights institutions to work, but we are there because we see other institutions moving forward. Our institution used to work like that. We used to work like that. Unfortunately, history is easily forgotten. Good practices in India are completely forgotten. And therefore, I think we will leave with this sign of hope. And the sign of hope is that human rights is possible and national human rights institutions are essential because they can definitely hold the hands of our victims, sisters and brothers in the domestic sphere. International is far away, but the domestic is there. Tomorrow we will see the faraway bird. Today we are seeing the domestic. And if in India it has not been possible today, I'm showing possibilities of what is happening in these countries. But I also want to tell you, it has been possible in the past. It has been possible in the past. And that was what you saw yesterday's panel. Thank you. Thank you, friends, for your patience. Thank you, Mathew, very, very much. We will ensure, tomorrow I'm handling the session. So I'll ensure that there's a special question session for you so that you don't go unquestioned. We will ensure that Mathew is questioned. Friends, come home prepared with lots of questions for Mathew. In my session, I will keep some time free to ensure that Mathew is questioned. Don't ask any questions to me, but I am only facilitator. Friends, last words. Don't forget your meetings today. Don't forget your meetings today. Very important. Your meeting connections are there. I will try to see whether I can walk into some of these meetings to say hello to you. Please walk into the meetings. Do not forget your activity number 9. Like this fellow Jerald is laughing. He says, now I see the trainer working. Your activity number 9 has to be performed, and tomorrow morning at 8:45 we will all be there to start the morning session. Tomorrow is only 10:30. Tomorrow is not more than 10:30. Thank you. I want to confirm to you that Justice Madan Lokur will be here for the valedictory session. He is delivering the valedictory address, and Meda Patkar has been confirmed for also Sunday morning. You are going to have feasts, my dears. You are going to have feasts. And tomorrow afternoon, you will have Professor Stephen Marks from the Harvard University handling UN mechanisms. All the best. Good night. Thank you, Karen. Once again, a tight hug to you. All virtual hugs these days. Gerard, to you also.
Bye-bye.
All the best. And to all friends in the commission. I was always, when I saw your mails marked to Simon, I said, Simon knows more about India than him.
Yeah.
All the best.
Okay. Bye-bye. Bye, Karen. Bye, Matthew. Take care.
Bye-bye. Bye, Mathew.
Bye.
Bye, Jerald. Yeah.
Bye.